The mental features discoursed of as the analytical are, in themselves, but little susceptible of analysis. We appreciate them only in their effects. We know of them, among other things, that they are always of their possessor, when inordinately possessed, a source of the liveliest enjoyment. As the strong man exults in his physical ability, delighting in such exercises as call his muscles into action, so glories the analyst in that moral activity which disentangles. He derives pleasure from even the most trivial occupations bringing his talent into play. He is fond of enigmas, of conundrums, of hieroglyphics, exhibiting in his solutions of each a degree of acumen which appears to the ordinary apprehension preternatural. His results, brought about by the very soul and essence of method, have, in truth, the whole air of intuition. Thus begins The Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. This video, will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being, obviously, the short story discussion playlist, but number two being the Edgar Allan Poe playlist, as we are nearing the end of October here in 2023. This video will have three parts: a So What Happened, where we sort of recap what happened in the story, a Lit Crit portion, as well as a Writer's Corner portion of this video, where we talk about some of the things that we could learn from this story as writers to improve our craft. So, what happened in The Murders in the Rue Morgue? Well, our narrator describes how he knows Dupin. The two are both rather reclusive and read in the newspaper that a mysterious double murder mystery has occurred. Madame L'Espagne and her daughter Camille have been slain in brutal fashion. The mother nearly decapitated and the daughter stuffed up in the chimney. Lots of bruising, lots of blood, lots of broken bones, etc. There are, however, no witnesses. This all happened in the space of their apartment. However, there were quite a few people who heard things going on, and no one can agree on the language which was being spoken by one of the two intruders, the second male. They say they heard, but perhaps the most confusing piece of evidence is what wasn't done. Namely, there was a great deal of riches which weren't stolen. A man has been arrested for the crime, but Dupin is sure that he is innocent because he didn't take the money, and the only available escape from the scene was an incredibly difficult leap. Dupin comes to the only logical conclusion. It was an orangutan. So there's that. He takes out an ad in the newspaper saying that he found one, and wouldn't you know it, a sailor shows up offering a reward. He's lost his orangutan. And Dupin, at that point, does the next logical thing. He pulls a gun on him and makes him tell the whole story of how he got the orangutan. The sailor said he captured the orangutan in Borneo and had meant to sell it. But when he caught the orangutan, attempting to shave, because he had watched the sailor shave, he decided he was going to whip the orangutan. And the orangutan got in such a frenzy that it ran away, and it killed the women, freaked out, and attempted to hide the bodies. So, no one is to blame for the murders, and everyone lived happily ever after. Except for the two women who were slain in brutal fashion. They're definitely dead. They died in primordial fear. And that sucks. Story's over. Now, what are we talking about with this short story? Well, I pulled up this quote here because I thought that it would be interesting to read. To observe attentively is to... So this was during the musings of our narrator during his time with Dupin in the beginning of the short story. He starts talking about playing games. To observe attentively is to remember distinctly, and, so far, the concentrative chess player will do very well at whist, while the rules of Hoyle themselves, based upon the mere mechanism of the game, are sufficiently and generally comprehensible. Thus, to have a retentive memory and to proceed by the book are points commonly regarded as the sum total of good playing, but it is in matters beyond the limits of mere rule that the skill of the analyst is evinced. We would normally call that evidenced, I believe. So I think there's a little bit of time to do with the particular word choice here, but then it carries on. He makes in silence a host of observations and inferences. So, perhaps, do his companions, and the difference in the extent of the information obtained lies not so much in the validity of the inference as in the quality of the observation. The necessary knowledge is that of what to observe. Our player confines himself not at all, nor, because the game is the object, does he reject deductions from things external to the game. He examines the countenance of his partner, comparing it carefully with that of each of his opponents. He considers the mode of assorting the cards in each hand, often counting trump by trump, and honor by honor, through the glances bestowed on their holders upon each. He notes every variation of face as the play progresses, gathering a fund of thought from the differences in expression of certainty, of surprise, of triumph, or of chagrin. From the manner of gathering up a trick, he judges whether the person taking it can make another in the suit. He recognizes what is played through feint by the air with which it is thrown upon the table. Now, the reason that I wanted to talk about this a little bit is because if you look up what is this short story about, oftentimes you will see, and I'm not sure I really fall into this camp, but it's definitely something that's interesting to talk about with this short story. Oftentimes you will see that this is a short story which pits brains versus brawn. This is about the intellect of Dupin versus the might of an orangutan. Though the two never find each other, the two never see each other, the two are never really going against one another. The orangutan is not trying not to be caught, other than in his ham-fisted attempts at hiding the bodies. And there's no real reason for Dupin to jump to the conclusion that, of course, it's orangutan. But, well, I guess he's got the hair, but anyway, and the hand marks on the neck. But the reason I thought that this was worth talking about is that part of this quote, when we're talking about the mere obeyance of the laws of the game not being enough, what we in the game of chess, oftentimes that is what is referred to as brilliance. And brilliant, like as a term, brilliance, not, oh, that guy's brilliant, but the term brilliance, sort of like in football, you can have a spin move. In basketball, you've got the Euro step. These are things that people do. It is a class of move known as brilliance, where you are not simply following the rules of the game, you are using the rules of the game to turn something which may have never been done before. That used to be one of the hallmarks by which we would we would sort of, if I can use the word Trump in here, trump ourselves up and say that, look, AI, these computers that play chess, they might be good, but really they're just memorizing moves. They don't have brilliance like us human folk do. Now, turns out they do. But I thought it was interesting that this is so this little passage goes, it's not quite little, but this passage then goes into the human element. So in chess, just like with the card games you're talking about here, the player will read reactions of the other person, of his opponent or opponents, in order to sort of see if he or she is on to something. That is another part of brilliance that maybe AI has not quite come around to yet. You can't feint an AI. So if this short story really is about brains versus bronze, it is interesting that it also includes the foreshadowing of brains versus super brains with the AI stuff. And while we're so there's a lot of irony here to be had, to be taken from the experience of the murders in the Rue Morgue. If we are to be talking about the rules of the game, there is quite a bit of irony to be talking about the term brilliance with this short story. Number one, because Edgar Allan Poe was lauded for this short story, saying this is a real brilliant writer. He's a genius. And in private letters, Edgar Allan Poe questioned this, saying, look, how much brilliance is there to unraveling a crime when I wrote the crime in the first place? But the real sort of meta irony here is that oftentimes this short story, as I made fun of it, right? I made fun of it because an orangutan, you just jumped to orangutan, and I've got a point about this in the writer's corner thing too that's coming up, but you jumped to orangutan? You've never seen an orangutan. Apparently you've read about orangutans, Dupin, but you just knew that's what it was? All right. We get angry about a detective story that ends in an off-the-wall conclusion, which turns out to be right, like two people in a city discovering that an orangutan had committed a pair of brutal murders. We, however, feel that anger because we know that in the detective fiction landscape, one of the things the writer has to do is to plant the actual assailant in the story. If the actual assailant isn't planted in the story, we, the reader, cannot get that satisfaction of solving it before Dupin or Holmes or Poirot, whoever it is. We can't get there on our own. And even if we don't get there on our own, once that brilliant detective solves the story, we're supposed to feel okay with it because we could have, given those same clues, solved it for ourselves. We know that because we are familiar with detective stories. That is one of the rules of detective stories. But this was the first detective story. Sherlock Holmes? No. Poirot? No. None of it. None of it was before the murders in the Rue Morgue. Edgar Allan Poe invented detective stories with this story, and then as the genre evolved, as the genre grew up, as it matured, the different ideas about what those things might be, which make that type of literature enjoyable, sprung up. So, we cannot retroactively judge this short story by the by the laws we know, apply to detective fiction. So it was an act of brilliance by which Edgar Allan Poe created a new genre of fiction and is retroactively downgraded for the story not following what we see as traditional rules of detective fiction. Those detective fictions were not established yet. So those are the only two real talking points I have for the lit crit portion. Now let's talk about some writer's notes here. The big one I have here. Okay, so let's just stick with that point. Dupin is written as a stupid person's idea of smart people. And I'm not saying that Poe is stupid, but you've heard that term before, probably. That this person reads, or this character on a show or a movie acts like a dumb person's idea of smart people. Now, what does that mean? Largely, what that means, oftentimes, is that they are quirky and they are clairvoyant. So when you take into account Sherlock Holmes as played by Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., he's very quirky. When you take into account the House, Dr. House, or House Doctor? Dr. House? The television show House. Very quirky. Of course, if someone's that brilliant, they have to be that quirky, don't they? Don't they, right? Don't they? Don't they have to be different than you and I? So that's one element. The other element is clairvoyant. There is a point in the story where Dupin tells our speaker what he's thinking. Not what Dupin is thinking. Our Dupin tells our speaker what our speaker is thinking. In fact, he just sort of jumps into thought with him. He jumps into conversation, and our speaker is left astonished. How did you know what I was thinking? That is a stupid person's idea of smart people. Why? So, in this story, however, it has to be set up that way because, well, it doesn't have to be, but we are looking at a new type of fiction. So, Poe was left with the conundrum of how do I communicate with my readers the extreme intellect of my hero? Well, I'll just make him clairvoyant and then have him explain himself as to how he knew the things that he had no idea or no reason to be able to know. Not the greatest way to write intelligent people, I don't think. And this is a problem that oftentimes you get into. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Yes, I will. You get into with Hollywood because it's a lot of people in that area of the country seem to be stupid people. So you have a writer who's a stupid person writing a character who's smarter than they are. Well, you can't do that. And then you have a director who's implementing a character smarter than they are and than the writer. And then you have an actor who's obviously a stupid person who is playing a character that was written by someone who is less intelligent than the character and being directed by someone who is less intelligent than the character, and none of it works out. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to be a super genius to write good stories. You just have to not include super geniuses in your story if you're not a super genius. Problem solved. But this does call into question. This calls into question another writerly trope for this short story that I'm not sure is necessary, but has nonetheless filtered its way into detective fiction. You have the question of the sort of bumbling sidekick. The bumbling sort of sidekick to whom our brilliant detective can explain all of his brilliant ideas. Otherwise, it's just brilliance on the page, and who wants that? I think the genre would be better off to lose the bumbling sidekick. Does this story at any point need our speaker? And look, I'm not calling into question Edgar Allan Poe himself, but does this story need our speaker, that second character? Is there any real reason for them to be there? Why are we not first-person present tense with Dupin? Why do we have to have this secondary bumbling character to whom everything has to be explained? We get it even a little bit in Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code. Again, stupid person's idea of smart people. But we have, I wish I did not plan on talking about this, but the characters are constantly bouncing ideas off of one another, in utter awe of each other's brilliance, so is that level of... So we don't have any problem with that when we're talking about a stupid narrator. For example, 10th of December, George Saunders, that collection of short stories. He uses quite a few narrators who are not bright people. We don't need a regular intelligence person to have those dumb ideas bounced off in order that we might understand them. Why do we have to have them for brilliant characters? I think it's just a question worth asking. That is all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out on the channel, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more. And I hope to have you back for the next video.